Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, let's talk about one of the most tangled, most hostile relationships in the world today, the one between Iran and the United States.
I mean, you see the headlines all the time, right? Crippling economic sanctions, proxy wars flaring up across the Middle East. It feels like these two countries are just stuck in this endless cycle of conflict. We all know what's happening now, but the story of how we got here, well, that's often missed.
To really get what's going on, you have to rewind the clock, and I mean way back. Back to a time that might sound completely unbelievable today. A time when Iran and the United States were actually really close friends.
So our story kicks off not in the Iran you see on the news, but in a totally different country, one that the world still called Persia.
For a huge chunk of the 20th century, Iran was run by a king, the Shah. He was pushing the country to be more like the West. We're talking women in modern dresses, a booming art scene. It was a pro-American secular monarchy, and a super important ally for the US during the Cold War.
But let's be real, this friendship was built on one thing above all else: oil. A gigantic oil field was found back in 1908, but the deal Iran got was, well, it was terrible. The British-owned company kept 84% of the profits. Iran got just a tiny slice of the wealth from its own land. And as you can imagine, that created a lot of anger. And all that anger, it had to go somewhere. It eventually boiled over, leading to the first and maybe the most important turning point in this entire story.
So in 1951, a man named Mohammad Mossadegh gets elected prime minister, and he is incredibly popular, just riding this huge wave of support. His promise was so simple, but it was powerful. Iran's oil should belong to the Iranian people, so he moved to nationalize the whole industry, to take it back from the British. Well, that idea did not go over well in London or in Washington. Terrified of losing control over all that oil, the CIA and Britain's MI6 literally orchestrated a coup. They toppled Iran's democratically elected government and put the Shah, who was way more friendly to them, back in total control.
This one event, known as Operation Ajax, is what many people call the original sin in the relationship. For tons of Iranians, it was the ultimate proof that the US cared way more about its oil supply than it did about their freedom. It was a betrayal they would never, ever forget. And that seed of anti-American anger, it didn't just disappear. No, it just simmered right below the surface for the next 25 years, until it finally and violently exploded. From his exile in Paris, this incredibly charismatic and fiery religious leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, started to build a movement. His message was simple. The Shah had sold out Iran to the Americans. And his speeches? They were recorded on cassette tapes, smuggled into the country, and his message just spread like wildfire.
By 1978, it wasn't just talk anymore. It was a full-blown revolution. The whole country was in an uproar. The Shah tried to crush the protests, but it was too late. In early 1979, he fled and never came back. Khomeini returned to a hero's welcome, and in a vote, Iranians decided to totally remake their country into the world's very first Islamic republic. The revolution's rage against America peaked when the US government let the exiled Shah into the country for cancer treatment. That was the last straw. Radical students stormed the US embassy in Tehran and took 52 Americans hostage. They held them for 444 agonizing days, and diplomatic ties have been broken ever since.
But the revolution didn't just change Iran, not even close. It sent these massive shockwaves across the whole Middle East, drawing new battle lines and creating new rivalries that are still playing out today.
See, Iran's neighbors, especially the Sunni Arab kingdoms, were absolutely terrified that Khomeini's revolutionary fever would spread to their own people. Seeing Iran in chaos after the revolution, Iraq's dictator Saddam Hussein saw an opportunity. He invaded, starting a horrific war that lasted for 8 years and killed maybe 1 million people. And out of the ashes of that war, a new kind of Cold War for the soul of the Middle East began. This one pitted the new Shia theocracy in Iran against the region's dominant Sunni power and a key US ally, Saudi Arabia.
In this slide, this really gets to the heart of it all. Iran's whole mission became exporting its revolutionary ideas. Saudi Arabia, with the US backing it up, wanted to contain Iran at all costs. For more than 40 years now, these two have been on opposite sides of almost every single conflict in the region, from Syria all the way down to Yemen.
Now that brutal 8-year war with Iraq, it taught Iran a very important lesson. It learned it couldn't win a direct, conventional fight against a powerful, well-supplied enemy. So it developed a new, much sneakier strategy. It mastered the art of the proxy war. Since Iran couldn't challenge the US, Israel, or Saudi Arabia head-on, it started building this whole network of allied militias and political groups. And it's a brilliant strategy, really. For way less money than a normal army would cost, Iran can get other groups to fight its battles for it.
This network, which Iran actually calls its axis of resistance, is how it projects power across the region. It allows them to threaten their enemies' interests without ever having to risk a direct war that they know they would probably lose. From Hezbollah up in Lebanon to the Houthis down in Yemen, these groups are the key to Iran's whole strategy.
And that brings us to the final and, let's be honest, the most dangerous piece of this entire puzzle: Iran's nuclear program. For Tehran, a nuclear weapon is the ultimate insurance policy, a guarantee that they'll never be invaded. But for the United States and its ally Israel, a nuclear-armed Iran is an existential threat, something that has to be stopped. And that creates this constant, high-stakes tension that always feels like it's about to boil over.
And that brings us right back to today. Every drone attack, every rocket launch, every tense standoff you read about in the news is an echo of this 70-year history. It's a story that started with a friendship built on oil and spiraled into one of the most dangerous rivalries on the planet. And with tensions higher than ever, the real question is, how does this all end? With diplomacy, or in a devastating war that could pull in the entire region?